It's the week ending Saturday, the 18th of November, and this is The Week Unwrapped. In the past 7 days, we've seen a coup in Zimbabwe, Theresa May stepping up the rhetoric against Russia, and a long-lost painting by Da Vinci selling at auction for $400 million. But we're here to bring you some of the stories that passed under the radar this week. Big news, not making headlines right now, but with repercussions for all our lives. I'm Olly Mann, and let's unwrap the week. And joining me this week from the week's digital team are Rebecca Gillie, Arion McNicoll and Cameron Tait. Starting the show this week, it's Rebecca. What do you think this week will be remembered for?
This is the week we learned that YouTube has a solution for modern parents who are too busy to traumatise their own children.
The thought of my daughter watching this is really upsetting. Like lots of kids, she doesn't like having her teeth brushed, and something like this could kind of make it more traumatic for her. The thought of like sending her to the dentist and thinking that she's going to have all her teeth taken out.
Mum of one, Natasha Harding, filmed by The Sun, watching a video of Peppa Pig having all her teeth removed. Rebecca, I'm guessing this isn't an official Peppa Pig animation.
You would be quite correct. It is not.
So what's the story here?
So the story, this is a scandal that's kind of been engulfing coverage of YouTube recently. It's been nicknamed ElsaGate after the character from Frozen. YouTube is flooded with millions upon millions of mysterious videos, most of them featuring the same popular children's characters. Peppa Pig is quite a common one. Elsa from Frozen, Spider-Man, for some reason the Joker. They're targeted towards toddlers, and a lot of them have a lot of kind of recurring tropes that are based off of what are obviously popular searches on YouTube. So if you look at the titles of some of these millions of videos, they usually have phrases in like learn colours or finger family, which is like this really popular nursery rhyme. And the contents of the videos are quite nonsensical a lot of the time. You have like Spider-Man swimming in a pool with a giant Chupa Chups lolly, and then them all being stabbed to death by the Joker. It's very strange and disturbing. The first kind of mainstream...
When you say strange and disturbing, I understand why it'd be strange and disturbing to a toddler. Is it even strange and disturbing to an adult?
It's extremely strange and disturbing, but crucially, it doesn't violate YouTube's content policies because they're not explicit enough to trigger the kind of filtration mechanisms of YouTube.
Because it's a cartoon.
Because,
so
they're cartoons. Yeah, but obviously it would be very traumatic for a child. And the issue is that they're coming up on the YouTube Kids app, which a lot of parents download for young children to use, because the whole thing is run by algorithms. You might think because the title YouTube Kids that it's being curated by someone for kids, but it's not. It's all governed by algorithms. So if you have enough search terms in your title, there's a good chance that that video is going to come up alongside official and genuine human-produced videos.
Okay, I mean, there's a lot to explore in what you've just said. It's melting my brain. Why this week?
The ElsaGate story has been coming out across this month. There's been a few high-profile articles about it in the New York Times, and a guy called James Bridle wrote one for Medium that got a lot of attention. This week, YouTube has announced that it's going to try and crack down on this sort of thing happening. From now on, when you use YouTube, if you're not logged in or your account is registered to someone under 18, you'll not be able to see age-restricted videos, which are the videos that contain things that are too disturbing for children, but not disturbing enough to be removed from YouTube. However, as some commentators have observed, the problem with this is that they're trying to solve the problem of algorithms by introducing more algorithms.
Yes. Okay, well, let's just start with that bit then, since that's the bit that's happened this week. Cameron, you understand this sort of thing. Why did YouTube create a kids app that wasn't curated by people? They're owned by Google, which is owned by Alphabet now in some complex structure. They're a massive company. They could afford people to curate videos for kids. Why didn't they do that?
Yes, they can afford people to curate this content, but you would need, I mean, we're talking about millions of videos here to sift through.
Yeah, but don't put them on. I mean, just make the kids app 500 videos to start with and then add a couple a day. It's fine, they're kids. Like, you know, my son watches the same episode of Thomas the Tank Engine every day.
His teeth get pulled out.
I guess theoretically you could. I guess the kids app came around at a time of where this wasn't as much of a problem as it is. And so they would, technically, if they were to do that, they'd have to cut all content and start again. Which would prove a massive headache for them to do that. So let's say you started off with 500 videos, which were curated over the course of a month, let's say, of people going through them. Then they would really have to trickle through them and kind of add content at a very slow rate after that. If you think about a lot of these videos as well, let's say if they have got one of these Peppa Pig videos, a 10-minute long video, it could be perfectly normal for the first 5 minutes and then go absolutely crazy and mad over the last 5 minutes. So you'd have to get people sitting there and watching every second for 10 minutes.
But hold on. There's so much to talk about here. But Peppa Pig is a copyrighted character, right?
Yes.
So unless it's uploaded by the creators of Peppa Pig or one of the channels that shows Peppa Pig, then it shouldn't be there if it's just someone uploading it from the telly, right? And if someone's done a parody video, why would a parody video be on the kids app? Because, I mean, in the nature of a parody, it's likely not to be something that you'd necessarily want to show children.
But isn't it the case that the whole point of YouTube is that it's user-generated content and it's fairly free and open and anyone can put whatever they want up? There are actually some parameters that allow you to use a little bit of licensed content, as we all know. So in the course of trying to stamp out all things that have a mention of Peppa Pig or a feature of Peppa Pig, they'd also get rid of a bunch of stuff that they didn't want to get rid of.
All right, I think it's safe to say that I've made my point and I disagree, but thank you for making the case for Google. Rebecca, why do these videos exist in the first place? I mean, who would create them?
Yes, exactly. This is the crux of it. A lot of that depends on who you think is creating them. And that's kind of a division at the moment on the internet, the people that are kind of starting to look into this. The incoherent nature of a lot of these videos and the fact that a lot of them use stock characters and stock situations that are kind of repeated over and over again in thousands of iterations has led some people to think that they are being generated by artificial intelligence programs, that essentially bots are reconfiguring the same characters and the same actions over and over again, which would explain why, most of these videos don't have a coherent plot.
But then, I mean, doesn't a human have to animate them at least?
Well, not necessarily. There have been people who know a lot
Arion's
more about
shaking
this.
his head. You know about artificial animation?
Did you ever use that program that allowed you to make two characters talk to one another? You input the words and the system did the animation. There are ways, basically, that you can automate the process of animation.
Yeah, but even with stock characters,
Even with stock
nodding.
characters,
Yeah, it's crude though. So if you a lot of these videos, if you look at it, you do have images of characters that obviously represent kids' TV shows, but the animations are crude. They're not nearly as polished as what you get on a proper television show.
Okay. You've answered how. You haven't answered why. So let's say it is a computer doing it. Why?
They make money.
How?
Because
advertising.
Yeah, because if you can get your videos to rise to the surface, get more eyeballs on those videos, and play ads against the videos that appear to genuine punters, then you make money. That's how YouTube creators make money. They get paid per ad view.
Yeah.
So if you can game the system,
videos that they know are going to be clickbait.
The titles are more important than the content because the titles are extremely long, usually incoherent, and just filled with words that are obviously commonly searched on YouTube, like Elsa, learn colours, nursery
So
rhyme.
you sort of explain why. You've explained it might be a human being or it might be a computer. But then, so back to the ethics then. Are they just designed for clickbait or are they designed to scare children?
I mean, that's just another terrifying, complicated strand of the whole ElsaGate debacle, is that there is some speculation that they are designed deliberately to normalise children to really disturbing situations. For instance, lots of the videos feature characters being given injections in a really kind of grotesque and scary way. And there has been some speculation that, because if we take the idea that these videos are being generated automatically, why are they featuring so many of these repeated, weird tropes? There has been some speculation that they could be being used to normalize children to disturbing scenarios. And there has even been some speculation that there might be a paedophilia element because the comments underneath, some people have speculated that they could contain code related to child abuse, especially on live action videos, because not all of these videos are animated. Some of them feature human actors acting out these same weird keyword generated scenarios.
I mean, how would the code work?
Well, the common explanation is that these are toddlers just mashing the screen while they're watching these videos.
That sounds more plausible, but okay,
some people have read codes into them, maybe discussing exchanging child sex abuse imagery, and also some of the comments are just outright sexual comments about underage girls in some of the live action videos. So they are certainly paedophiles watching.
And so then the concept would be that you're normalising painful experiences for children as a way of grooming them? That you'd actually show these videos to children as a way of grooming kids? Is that the idea?
Yeah, that's the idea, is that they could theoretically be used by people who are grooming children to normalise them to those kinds of experiences.
And that's all happening on YouTube's dedicated children's app.
I think that's what makes ElsaGate so particularly fascinating and sort of bottomless, that it really asks us to think about the way that algorithms are used across the internet. And let's face it, we run a digital publication and we specifically target key phrases to bring in punters. For example, we might know that using the word Melania and fashion will bring people to the site, and you can then keep them on the site.
Yes, but that will be an article about Melania Trump's fashion, right?
Yes, it will, but
it won't be about Kurdistan.
Sure, but across the internet, people are trying to work out how to use keywords to bring people to their website to make money, and it's not just happening on YouTube.
And Cameron, do you think YouTube are actually scared of the reaction to this?
They're going to have to respond. Remember we talked about, a few weeks ago, we talked about bump stock after the horrendous shooting in Las Vegas, and YouTube actually took action. They realised that there was a real problem of people accessing gun-related videos on YouTube, and they took action. It wasn't quite as strong as some had hoped for, but this can take a long process. I believe they will come round to it, but without opening another can of worms, I'm not even sure if the technology is ready yet for that.
But I mean, it comes back to, as so many of these stories do, Google's opening mantra. If your mantra is don't be evil, then invest the money to make sure children don't watch their favourite characters get injured or groom them for paedophiles. That's fairly, I mean, as it seems to me, quite clear cut.
Oh, yeah. No, the problem isn't...
Without stopping adults watching these videos.
The problem isn't figuring out whether it's ethically wrong or not. They can quite easily say, no, don't do that content, and they can even go and put it in their T's and C's. But it's already out of control. There are millions and millions up there. Who's going to go and take them down? An algorithm, if they went and culled all of those, they could go and take in loads of kids shows as well, and it would just be an absolute mess. They need to develop a technology that can take it down accurately.
And just to kind of take a step back, because we've got quite far down the rabbit hole of weirdness, but I think one of the most incisive things
we haven't even got to Cameron's story yet.
One of the most incisive things that's been written about ElsaGate was by Natasha Lomas on TechCrunch, and her wider point was, okay, the most disturbing videos have got the attention because, it is a kind of lurid, interesting story. But on a wider level, those represent a minority of the millions and millions of incoherent, nonsensical videos based on keywords that are being placed in front of really young children. Even if they're not harmful, do we really want children to be exposed to what, as she calls it, literal pap? It's just a series of unrelated images with no overarching narrative based on popular keywords. It's a form of entertainment that children have never been exposed to before. It hasn't been curated by humans. It may not have even been created by humans. And is it something that 2, 3, 4, 5-year-olds should be watching for hours at a time?
Especially if you're listening in the UK right now. Seriously, CBeebies. It's free. There's an app. You can choose stuff that's 10 minutes long.
And it's curated.
And it's good. And there's no ads. People are weird. Let's move on. Arion, you're up next. What do you think this week will be remembered for?
This week offered a reminder that the refugee crisis is forgotten but not gone, rather than gone but not forgotten.
People tried to swim the border river of Poland to Germany, and they got killed in this attempt. And both sides, the border guards didn't want to have the dead body, so they were pushing with sticks on the dead body so that they float away to the Baltic Sea. And this is, in our opinion, was rather scandalous, but nobody paid attention because it was once a week, maybe a little message in a small newspaper locally that a dead body was found. Yeah. And we started to notice, because we were networking and working Europe-wide, that this happened much more than we realized, and that's how it started.
German newspaper editor Geert Attes talking to NPR's Kelly McEvers. Arion, this is Der Tagesspiegel, the German newspaper, publishing the names of 33,000 people who have lost their lives trying to enter Europe since 1994. I don't want to sound callous, but in the format of our show, why is that the story of the week?
Yes, so this was a feature that was published in Der Tagesspiegel on the weekend, and they collated this list of names of all of the refugees who had died trying to reach Europe, as you say. But I think it's interesting because it puts back on our radar the fact that this is still ongoing. You know, there was a lot of press in 2015, even last year, when the most recent refugee crisis exploded, but it sort of dropped off the news agenda, but it's still ongoing. And in fact, 2017 wasn't the biggest year in terms of refugee fatalities, but it's still a massive number of people who died both in the Mediterranean and crossing along the Aegean route. Do
you happen to know what was the biggest year?
It was 2015.
So the stats going back since 1994, though, suggest that actually, I mean, I get what you're saying. This has been ignored slightly in the last year, but it was kind of ignored for the 20 years before it turned up on the front pages of the tabloids anyway.
I'd say so. And I think that what sharpened people's minds to the fact that there is an issue and has been an issue for quite a while was the fact that Syria descended into civil war, and simultaneously the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq caused a great movement of people. And I think that we were sensitive to the fact that there was a problem because there were vast numbers of people trying to arrive, and many of them were perishing on the journey.
Okay, but why the story of the week? I mean, we often do things on this show where we're saying, look, North Korea, look, Russia, other stuff's happening that's not being reported. Look, Zimbabwe, we could have said in previous weeks.
Yeah.
Why now are you saying, look, refugees?
I think because we're getting towards the end of 2017 and it's a good time to take stock and ask why we haven't been talking about this. I mean, this is our 44th, 45th show, and we haven't talked about refugees in the whole time that we've been doing this. So you're right. In a sense, there's been no mass event, but even the publication of this list, which did have a resonance in its own right, does put it back into our minds in a way that I think is valuable. And when you look at the list itself, looking at a list of 33,000 odd names is a really distressing thing, because it also lists alongside there the names of the people they were able to find, their cause of death, where they died, and where they had come from. So, yeah, so it's a staggering document, and I think worthy of attention.
And it may have made an impact in Germany, Cameron, but does that actually make a difference to us here? Why isn't it cutting through here?
Well, definitely. I think what makes a difference is we're always so concerned with the vast number of immigrants that are coming from different countries and do so successfully, and they arrive in a country. But we never really see the total death toll. Obviously, we hear about these horrible stories about people sinking in ships. But we also focus on the negative. We always focus on what is the impact that immigrants have when they do come into our country, rather than those that have lost their lives on the way.
Or the positive impact that they might have coming into our country, I suppose, as well. I mean, it's very rare that people go back 3 years later and say, look at this startup.
Yeah, exactly. It's very rare that we look at the positive, though. There are positives, but it's very rare that the actual press focuses on it.
Okay, and this estimate, although it's a very rigorous one, is just an estimate, isn't it, Rebecca? So what do you think the actual number is?
I mean, I think the actual number is likely to be far higher, because there are people who have lost their lives before they even reach the crossing points. So, and we're not really going to hear about that kind of death toll. It's a challenging document because, it's raw data, and it's really up to the individual to decide what they're going to do about, what their reaction is going to be to that sheer number. And I think that most people, like the vast majority of people, would agree that there has to be some basic human compassion, in the sense that, if you see someone drowning, then you save them. And then you have to work out afterwards what's going to happen to them. But then there's the wider argument about where do we draw the line in terms of what we offer to people who arrive in Europe through these illicit routes. There is the argument that tacitly endorsing those kind of transport links to Europe does empower human smugglers to say, well, look, we can get you to Europe and you'll receive good treatment and this kind of thing. Whereas if you take a harder line stance, maybe more people would die in the short term, but fewer would die in the long term in unsuccessful attempts, because fewer would resort to these people smugglers.
Well, that is what was being discussed in 2015, isn't it, Arion? And really the debate hasn't gone on much further than that.
I think that's right. And when Angela Merkel famously flung the doors open of Germany for 6 months, receiving a good 1 million refugees from largely Syria, Afghanistan and Iraq, there were two types of backlash. There was internal backlash. She didn't manage to take Germany with her. And there was also a sort of external backlash. I think that the rest of the EU didn't respond in kind, and And so the problem wasn't one that managed to be shared across the EU, but ended up being a German problem. And I think that that's been the problem with the EU's response in general. It has been individual rather than joined up. The only time that they have managed to join up is more recently when when work has been done to close those two routes via the Aegean and via the Mediterranean for refugees to arrive in the first place. And I think that that goes to the question of why the numbers have gone down recently rather than up, because the routes are closed. But as Rebecca was saying, it doesn't mean that fewer people are dying. As to that question, though, just to come back to what Rebecca said earlier of the significance of having a document of 33,000 names, I think you're right, that it doesn't really, people aren't able to contemplate death on that scale, and probably the death of the young boy Alan Kurdi, whose body was photographed on the beach and made world news, probably had more significance peculiarly than this document will. So you're right to ask the question, will this have any resonance greater than the people who the document arrived to with their copy of Der Tagesspiegel?
I would say, though, from an optimistic perspective, is that the document, even though it is vast in terms of the number of names on it, does try and give as much personalisation to the individuals as possible, which I think is definitely positive for people who are advocating for a more compassionate response to the refugee crisis. Because, as you're saying with Alan Kurdi, that provoked a huge outpouring of what I thought seemed pretty genuine compassion from a lot of people.
But those stories, the personal stories aren't really there. It is still ultimately a list of statistics, though, isn't it? It might say, the age and the gender and the nationality and where it was reported. But what it doesn't say, and I've hosted enough phone-ins on this to know that this is what the public need to hear, what it doesn't say is what had happened to that person to make them so desperate that they got on the boat. We can all understand that it must have been something. But as long as the public are able to say, well, that person was basically an economic migrant seeking a better life, and I don't blame them, but were they really escaping persecution? As long as there's any blurred line about that, it's harder to get public sympathy on side. Yeah,
no, definitely. And I think the thing is that a lot of these people who have lost their lives and the people who did successfully make it to Europe probably didn't really want to go to Europe. They didn't go because they always wanted to know what it was like to live in Germany. They went because of circumstances, whether persecution or economic circumstances in their home countries. And that really is the crux of the issue, is that, whatever our response to the refugee crisis in Europe is, the basic problem is still the fact that there are these places in the world where people would rather risk their lives than to leave than continue living there. And those are the issues that are ultimately going to have to be dealt with.
These countries are right on our doorstep as well. It's not like they're on the complete opposite side of the world. And while we do get involved in some crisis, very, very far away from our home, these people are right next to us and we can help.
But those stories, just final point on this, I'm reminded of what some intellectual said about Anne Frank. I can't remember who it was, unfortunately, but I remember she said statistics don't bleed, and it was this issue about Anne Frank becoming the poster child for the Holocaust, despite the fact that obviously she was quite recent, that she lived for quite a few years in escaping persecution, but she became a poster child because people could relate to that story and understand that this was a teenage girl, a normal girl who ended up going to a concentration camp. As journalists, those stories aren't really being reported when refugees arrive on our shores. I haven't read many interviews with refugees who came here 3 years ago. So the only stories we hear is about death. And actually, are statistics of death really that useful? Isn't it better to know what happens, actually talk about the issues people have and the positives people get from refugees coming to their country?
I think you're right, and I think that this needs to be a springboard for the issue getting back into the mainstream of reporting, because I don't think that many people will be able to look at that list, which goes, after all, runs to 48 pages in quite fine print. And you're right, you just can't get your head around the scale of the problem when it's presented that way. So, yeah, I think it is incumbent upon the media to react and to start telling a few stories, because there's a lot of stories out there.
Time for our final story, and it's Cameron. What do you think this week will be remembered for?
Well, I've got a question for all of you. Will the flying car craze take off?
Have you ever been caught in a traffic jam and wished you had wings and could fly away from it all? Well, you're not the only one, but Moulton Taylor of Longview, Washington did something about it. He designed and built the Aero Car. At San Francisco's International Airport, Taylor shows how quickly you can convert car into plane. change a 60-mile-per-hour traffic-hampered buggy into a high flyer on the unlimited highways of the sky.
You just had a Vox report from this week. Of course not. That was, in fact, a newsreel segment from the 1950s showcasing the aero car. Cameron, flying cars.
So this week, the Chinese car giant Gillie has bought up an American startup company called Refugee, which is a flying car firm.
Who are Gillie?
So Gillie owns Volvo and the Lotus sports car company.
Okay.
They have invested in flying cars, but what makes this a significant story is that they're not the first to do it. We even had a story last week of Uber and NASA teaming up to go and pursue flying cars. So I'm wondering, what's it all about?
And what's it all about?
Very funny. So we're at a crossroads because you've got companies that are pursuing what the next stage in modern transport is and tackling A, emissions in cities, and B, traffic. Some companies are pursuing flying cars, others are pursuing underground tunnels.
I thought the whole self-driving car thing, which is a thing, you can't say that's PR bullshit anymore. That is happening, right? It might take another 10 years till it's actually mainstream, but it is happening. Mm-hmm. I thought the whole self-driving car thing was that if cars are autonomous, then all the issues you're describing about navigating around cities aren't an issue because they can be environmentally friendly so they don't pollute, and they can regulate themselves so they don't crash, and they modulate, and you can order one to just take you where you want so you don't have to own it. So why do you need a tunnel or a flying car? Exactly.
This is what causes some of the confusion. So my answer to that would be, yes, we'll have autonomous cars coming, potentially in the next 5 years or 10 years. Like you said, it's a real thing. It's going to happen. But you won't see a widespread, petrol cars will come off the road and they'll be replaced by autonomous cars. You'll have a mix of both of them. So you'll still have traffic problems and emission problems. So the idea of a flying car is to alleviate some of it. Let's say you want to go somewhere in a city, you could essentially go to a flying car station, get in the flying car, and it would take you somewhere else. You essentially cut out all the traffic, and it'd be electric.
There are issues with traffic, though, aren't there, Rebecca, in the sky, as in planes, birds, telegraph poles, buildings?
I mean, I feel like we've been talking for as long as I've been alive about how London should have all of those raised walking platforms that they have in New York, and it hasn't happened yet. And that's for people to walk slightly off the ground, never mind driving around in the sky. It does sound relatively preposterous at the moment when, as you say, we already have things in the sky, ranging from obviously, planes, but then also nearer the ground. That space is usually considered pretty open at the moment. I mean, where would you start? Where would the road markings be? And would you drive, would you have 2 lanes of traffic in the sky?
Do you need another driving test? I'm presuming yes.
Exactly. However, at the same time, if these firms are investing in flying cars, they must think there is some kind of possibility they could be a real thing.
That's where I take my lead. And even though I think it was only a couple of weeks ago, Elon Musk came out and said flying cars, they're never going to happen. The fact that Uber and Google are both investing in flying car technology, or at least I think you wanted to make a distinction between flying cars and drone taxis. So maybe, that solves the question of whether you need a new license to drive these things. They're just going to be boxes that pick you up, have wings, and take you somewhere else.
Sounds absolutely terrifying.
Yeah, it does.
They would be more like a bus.
More like a helicopter, I guess, realistically, just en masse.
So the one that Uber and NASA are teaming up with is essentially a drone taxi. So you would get into it at a port and it would take you somewhere all autonomously. You wouldn't need to drive it. It's a taxi. The one that Gillie has invested in is a flying car, of where you can go and get in your car and you can, elevate vertically and then
it's very Professor Frinkian, isn't it? That's something that they're going to have to overcome, is how to make this credible in the eyes of the wider public.
If it was a personal flying car, they could make it autonomous, so you wouldn't need another driving license. You would just need to get in your car and it would take you somewhere. The only other thing that I'm thinking of is potentially it's being used as a PR stunt, essentially. I mean, I'm guessing a lot of you may not know who Gillie is. We're now talking about Gillie. I think it could be all part of saying, oh, look, we're futuristic. We're a big car company. Come and invest in us.
And even slightly more sinister than that, this is my theory, and forgive me, I have espoused it on my other podcast, The Modern Man, but I think Uber teaming up on flying cars is a way of making autonomous vehicles, which, as we discussed, we know they're working on, because then they can fire all their drivers, seem more pedestrian. You know, it seems like, well, if the future's flying cars, then autonomous vehicles is no big deal. And all of these companies have an interest in desensitizing the paranoia about what autonomous cars could mean in terms of collisions and everything else.
It could be that, but it could also be that the reason why we keep talking about flying cars and even fantasizing about flying cars for decades is because there's something not only fascinating, but also just intuitive about it. There's room in the sky. We need to get around. Why would we not use that space to do it? We've already got planes. They would have seemed absurd sometime in the not so distant past. So it sort of seems to me that the problem is A, imagination, and B, technology. But those are two things that we've got over in the past. Surely we're going to be getting around in flying cars eventually, aren't we?
We do have a fascination around it. I mean, again, that clip from the 1950s of us getting really excited about a flying car, again, it's not really taken off, but sometimes this does take time. We were fascinated by flight in the 1800s, and then obviously we did take to the skies. There is a chance, but arguably we already have flying cars now, and they're called helicopters. And they're still horrendously expensive, and they're noisy, and you have to go through years of training to go and use it. The alternative is Elon Musk's tunnel system, which is basically going to be burying under the streets of cities and using existing cars to go and drive underneath the cities instead of investing in a new infrastructure of flying people up in a new car and everything.
Yeah. Or just walk around a city. That is it from this edition of The Week Unwrapped. My thanks to Rebecca Gillie, Arion McNicoll and Cameron Tait. For more from The Week, why not visit theweek.co.uk, where you can also sign up to our free email newsletter, The Weekday. Or just like the Jetsons with their flying cars, you can have The Week delivered direct to your door. It's amazing technology, the post. Just head to theweek.co.uk/subscribe. Remember as well, all our previous episodes are available on our podcast feed. So wherever you're listening to me right now, you can find all of our archive there, or just search for The Week Unwrapped on your podcasting app of choice. I've been Olly Mann. Our music is by Tom Morby, the producer Matt Hill at Rethink Audio. Until we meet again to unwrap next week, bye-bye.